Moldova is a wonderful place. If you go around the country long enough, you will understand why it is a European Union in miniature. The big EU has 27 countries plus one disputed territory, the so-called Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. The small EU, Moldova, has at least 3 countries plus one disputed territory. In the second episode, I showed you a bit around the capital city, which in many ways it's one of the countries of Moldova. Today we head south to a place you wouldn't believe it exists unless someone shows it to you. Back in 2018, during the Israel tour, we uncovered that there is one institution that still works under Ottoman rules. That would be Histadrut, or the General Organization of Workers in Israel. Well, what if there's also a place, a territory, that still sort of works under Ottoman rules, yet the inhabitants aren't Muslims, but Orthodox Christians, and the leader is called a Bashkan, like in the Ottoman rule, but the leader can be a woman, and indeed she is as of right now, and is democratically elected. Fluency in the local language, Moldovan citizenship and the age of 35 are required in order to run for Bashkan. Yet the current governor is of Romanian descent, but don't tell that to her, because she'll be very upset. The official language is a dialect of Turkish, sort of, ish, yet it's rarely heard on the streets, Russian being the absolute norm here. You wouldn't know it when you enter the region, but it becomes very clear very fast, since writing in the local language in the capital city, in public, is shockingly absent. So, an autonomous region of a Turkic-speaking people in Moldova that actually speaks Russian, but it's organized like in the Ottoman Empire, but the people is Orthodox Christian. Yep, seems legit. Welcome to Găgăuzia. Let's explore.
Yapma, bucaktan şarap soğumaz, bucaktan şarap soğumaz. Ne da deme, ne da yapma, bucaktan şarap soğumaz, bucaktan şarap.
Hello everyone and welcome to the third featured installment of Knowing Moldova. I'll be brutally honest with you. Unless you spend enough time here, there is nothing I can say about Gagauziya that can clarify why this place exists as an autonomous region. But I'll try. So, you are now looking at footage from Comrat, the capital city of what is officially known as the Autonomous Territorial Unit of Gagauziya. It's the largest city of a place that is 1,830 square kilometers in surface. About the size of the tiny island nation Union of the Comoros and slightly bigger than the Faroe Islands. It has almost 3 times more people than the Faroe Islands, but it's much less populated than Comoros. Geographically, Gagauziya is unimpressive. Economically, it's even less impressive, the economy being mostly agriculture. Some of it internationally relevant because they make very good wine, just like the rest of Moldova, and the rest of it relevant only if you're taping a documentary about subsistence agriculture in the 21st century. For instance, this is footage from less than 20 kilometers southeast of Comrat. We simply took a left turn from the main road. In fact, I have about 4 hours of footage like this from all over Gagauziya. If I hadn't seen it and videotaped it myself, I would have never believed it that the place is so unremarkable geographically and economically. However, what makes Gagauziya interesting is its politics.
yapma İnsan işler şarap yapar Fıçı dolar şirakay ver Meza demya neda yapma
So, first things first. Who are the Gagauz people? Well, no one knows for sure. There are multiple theories as to how a group of people speaking a Turkic language that resembles Turkish quite a bit, but it's not Turkish, ended up in the middle of a territory that has been speaking Romanian or derivatives. The presumption is that the Gagauz people migrated here somewhere between the 13th and the 17th century. But when? And how? And why? Well, nobody knows for sure. In part because the Gagauz people have been independent for exactly 6 days in the year 1906, following a peasant uprising that proclaimed the Comrade Republic. It took the Russian Empire 6 days to get here and put the rebellion to an end. In any event, the most widely accepted theory is that the Gagauz people are descendant of the Oghuz clan, that in the 1200s, following a conflict with other Turkic tribes, fled Anatolia and settled in what is nowadays Bulgaria. That clan also adopted Orthodox Christianity soon after settling. It is still unclear, though, how descendants of that clan ended up so far north. And the reason this theory is somewhat accepted in academic circles is because the Gagauz language is indeed a mixture of Old Turkish and Old Bulgarian, plus a few loanwords from Russian, Romanian, German and Hebrew. These would be the people groups that have been living in present-day Moldova over the last 600 years or so. Oh, and some Arabic loanwords too. Heck, the name Gagauz is also unclear in origin. What is clear is that in the 19th century the exonym Gagauz wasn't accepted by the Gagauz people, and arguably they considered it an insult. Authors from the 1890s say that this people group was usually identifying itself as Christian Bulgars. Good luck figuring that one out. Russian historiography, however, says that the Gagauz people were brought here in 1812 when Bessarabia fell under Russian control and the Tsarist administration preferred the Gagauz people here and banished the Nogai tribes that previously existed here. The Nogai tribes are also a Turkic people group that now spread from as far away as Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and all the way to western Bulgaria. This version of events, the Russian version, just has one problem. Nogai presence, which Tsarist history says it was banished from Bessarabia, in fact continues to exist. And linguistical analysis of the Gagauz language does rather point out that the Nogai tribes were just a bit spread out and the Gagauz people assimilated them too into a larger Turkic conglomerate. This version of events also doesn't explain how exactly was the Tsarist Empire able to move such a large segment of the Ottoman population, for 1812 standards anyway, from present-day eastern Bulgaria through Dobroja, nowadays in Romania, at the time guarded port area of the Ottoman Empire, and all the way up north in the newly acquired territory. Now, I get it that Russian historiography is keen on presenting Tsarist Russia as something almighty, but the resources required to pull this off would have been tremendous even for the Russian Empire in 1812. And so much effort to bring an Orthodox Turkic tribe from a rival empire? I mean, if the Tsar wanted a Turkic tribe in this region, there were plenty such tribes in the Russian Empire already, and there would have been fewer security risks to bringing those if that's what the Tsar wanted. So, you will excuse me if I'm not very keen at accepting this version of events. But, on the other hand, since the Gagauz people haven't been very interested in telling their version of the story until way into the 1980s, I guess for now one will have to settle for his or her preferred version. Anyway, back to politics. The political story is quite simple. The Gagauz people had no relevant political objections to Russia's machinations until 1906, when, as I said earlier, a peasant uprising proclaimed the Comrade Republic, which lasted for 6 days. The Russian Empire was just not impressed. That's not to say attempts at autonomy did not exist, of course, but it is to say that the Russian administration was much better at it and succeeded in making the Gagauz people learn Russian and consider it, to this day, the standard language of communication not just with other ethnic groups, but even amongst themselves. In 1918, the territory known today as Republic of Moldova becomes part of the Kingdom of Romania. While Romania did work hard from 1878 onwards to Romanianize and assimilate the Turkic population inherited in Dobrogea following the Independence War, the kingdom did not try that hard to do the same with the Gagauz people. The short version of the reason is this: the Gagauz people are Orthodox Christians and were Orthodox in 1918 as well, and this particular identity factor turned out in practice to be much more important than language. As a result, not only many here did learn the Romanian language voluntarily, but many of them ended up being involved in the Romanian national politics, particularly in the fascist Iron Guard. One has to remember that the fascist movements in the interbellum in Romania were focused on militant Christian orthodoxy a lot more than on ethno-racial considerations. Of course, don't tell that to the modern fans of these movements, because they will be upset. Also, the emergence of the adaptation of the Latin script for the Gagauz language, the first complete and authorized translation of the Bible into the Gagauz language, all of these occurred in the 1930s during the Romanian administration. The most important figure being Father Mihail Chakir, still honored today with monuments in Găgăuzia. Mihail Chakir was from Ceadărlunga, at the time Tighina County, not far away from Comrat, and he edited the Romanian language magazine Life in Basarabia. Locally, he is known as the apostle of the printed Gagauz language. However, as history goes, all of that was edited, and Basarabia, including the Gagauz people, ended up again under Russians, this time under the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union then pursued to do what it did in other territories that it had conquered, used various minorities against the majority population to keep the populace divided and looking towards Moscow for solutions. Just like with other Turkic peoples that didn't have a written history, such as the Kyrgyz people or the Tajik people, the Soviet Union superimposed Russian as their language at first, and later on allowed the proliferation of the local language, but just like with Romanian in the rest of Moldova, using the Russian alphabet. That's one thing the Gagauz people definitely have in common with the Romanians in Moldova. They both had to work to overturn that and resume their normal way of writing based on the Latin script. I showed you in the previous episode a short clip from August 1989, when in Chișinău a huge crowd forced the Soviet administration to accept Romanian as the language of the land, denouncing Russian as being imposed. But something else was said then too. Let me repeat that portion of the clip for you.
Cei care vor două limbi de stat vor de fapt două state într-un stat. Într-adevăr, noi suntem acasă și la urma urmei și noi suntem pentru două limbi de stat și chiar pentru 3 limbi de stat și chiar pentru 15 limbi de stat, însă de stat rusă în statul rus, de stat ucraineană în statul ucrainean. De stat bulgară în statul bulgar și de stat turcească în statul turcesc. Însă, numai de stat moldovenească, idem română, numai în statul suveran al Moldovei. Aceasta ne-i vrerea și acesta ne-i păsul, limbă suverană în stat suveran. Ne-am deprins cu toții și i-am deprins și pe alții să vadă Moldova ca un strugure de poamă stând pe harta Uniunii.
The example with Turkish and Bulgarian was not at random at all. At the same time, while this movement was happening in Chișinău, the Găgăuz people had also formed their own intelligentsia throughout the 1980s, as the USSR had loosened its grip on cultural and linguistical control. And the Găgăuz intelligentsia had also embraced a nationalistic ideal, one more to the liking of the USSR in a way. In practice, the Gagauz movement aligned politically with the Soviet hardliners, even though the people weren't and aren't necessarily communist. So, in 1988, their intelligentsia forms Gagauz Halki, a separatist political party that wanted an independent state in the south of what was then the Soviet Socialist Republic of Moldova, with Comrat as the capital city. The movement becomes very popular in September 1989 after Romanian was accepted as the official language in Chișinău. Găgăuz Halki feared that Moldova overall would unite with Romania, which was deemed unacceptable by the intelligentsia at the time. This man, Stepan Mihailovici Topal, emerges as a leader of the Găgăuz nationalist movement. He would then end up being the first de facto governor, or Bașcan, of Găgăuzia. He died in 2018, and in 2019 there was a controversy because the local authorities wanted to rename the central street in Comrat, this street from which you're seeing footage right now, after Stepan Topal. If you read the press, you will remain with the confusion on whether the move was approved or not. Some outlets say that it was, but I will tell you, after having been here in July 2021, the street has not been renamed. It's still called Vladimir Ilich Lenin Avenue, because old habits die hard. In any event, this footage with Mr. Topal is taken from a documentary called Moldova 8991. If you speak Russian and Romanian, and unfortunately you need both, you absolutely should watch that documentary. It explains a lot of details about how present-day Moldova was born as a political entity. Anyway, back to 1989, Mr. Topal, as I said, emerges as a sort of a national leader for the Gagauz people. In March 1991, just a few months before the Soviet Union ceased to exist, Mr. Topal organizes a referendum on whether the Gagauz people should continue to be a part of the Soviet Union. The referendum passes with flying colors, almost unanimously. However, when the parliament in Chișinău voted on whether Moldova overall should secede from the Soviet Union and become independent, 6 of the 12 Gagauz members joined the majority to vote in favor. That precipitated things, in a way. Meanwhile, in Moscow, the last attempt at saving the Soviet Union takes place on August the 19th, when hardline communists try a coup d'etat against Gorbachev. The coup fails, but back in Comrat, Mr. Topal and friends proclaim the Gagauz Republic. Next month, Transnistria does the same thing. We'll get back to Transnistria later on in this series, but for this talk, it is relevant to say that the subsequent commencement of the Transnistrian War made the Gagauz intelligentsia a bit more flexible. The prospect of a war slowly changed the perspective. Independence at absolutely any cost wasn't exactly what the people wanted, especially since the Soviet Union had made it clear that they won't intervene in another conflict. Long story. What matters is that between September 1991 and 1994, the Gagauz Republic sort of existed, although unrecognized and with unclear borders, as the rest of Moldova was focused on the Transnistrian War. Eventually, a ceasefire agreement is reached there, and the unrecognized Pridnestrovian Moldovan Republic is proclaimed. Well, that wasn't an outcome that the Gagauz intelligentsia wanted. For a region that lives from agriculture, unfettered commerce was, and continues to be, quite a big deal. And the Gagauz intelligentsia correctly observed that precisely this aspect was not on the table for Transnistria. So, in spite of various warnings from Russian sources, the Gagauz movement comes back to negotiations. In February 1994, as the Moldovan constitution was being written and ratified, Chișinău refuses any claim of independence, but the status of an autonomous region is granted. Moreover, the Moldovan parliament adopts the so-called right of external self-determination to the people of Găgăuzia should the status of the country change. Translation: if Moldova is to unite with Romania, Găgăuzia would have the option to refuse for itself to become part of the new country. The geographical limits of what is today known as the Autonomous Territorial Unit of Gagauziya were also settled via successive referendums in all settlements, read villages, that had at least 40% people who declared themselves as Gagauz. Unlike Transnistria, this region ended up having a slightly more peaceful resolution for its conflict with Chisinau. Today, the Autonomous Territorial Unit of Găgăuzia proudly displays the Moldovan flag next to the local one, and officially the place has 3 official languages: Romanian, Gagauz, and Russian. This makes the overly obsessed with minority rights Western leftists to routinely cite Găgăuzia as a successful example of peaceful resolution. Well, that's it. Koniec filma. All good. Всё добре. Right? Well, not so fast. You see, it's all fine and dandy until one looks just beneath the surface. In reality, Găgăuzia is now a playground for the autocratic regime in Turkey to flex its muscles around here. The Gagauz people don't really like Erdogan's neo-Ottomanist agenda. I mean, after all, their ancestors ran away from the Ottoman Empire, but the prospect of easy work visas in Turkey and the schools built by the Turkish state here are sweetening the deal a bit. Add to that corrupt local officials who can't really be held to account by the central government because, hey, it's an autonomous region. And what you're having today is a continuation of generalized poverty from which there is the Russian escape and the Turkish escape. The region has about 126,000 people. About a third have permanently left the place since the fall of the Soviet Union, and other than what Turkey has invested here and there, everything not only stayed roughly the same, but even went backwards. A bit over 15 years ago, I was representing a company, a Romanian-Swedish joint venture, and I came down here to negotiate an investment of roughly $10 million in a factory, housing facilities, a kindergarten, and a school. After a year of talks, we eventually got rejected because they found out that we're going to put the Romanian and the Swedish flag on the building. The Swedish partner was never able to understand the situation. Eventually, we moved the investment in Ukraine. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that the populace is still being held into a subpar path of development solely based on the rigid language considerations and indoctrination. After all, it was the Romanian administration that made it possible for the Gagauz language to come to life in written format. Schools in the Gagauz language also first emerged under Romanian rule and proper national Orthodox rite too, as I mentioned earlier. The officials know these things all too well, but in the schools of the present-day autonomous region, these aspects are, well, conveniently avoided, because an identity crisis and discord with Romania, which today has zero involvement here anyway, are a lot more profitable. But it's not all doom and gloom. As opposed to 10 years ago, I was approached in English or Romanian by most of the youngsters. Gone are the days when visitors and strangers are presumed hostile and then confirmed hostile once they don't reply in impeccable Russian. While in Moldova, I also had a personal quest. I wanted to buy a slightly more advanced, let's say B2 level, study manual of the Russian language, preferably from Romanian, for someone back home. Just like in Chisinau, I was told they no longer sell these things in the bookstore because nobody is buying them anymore, as people seek to learn Romanian and English rather than Russian. The old lady with a distinctly Russian name from the bookstore tried really hard to explain that to me in Romanian. When I replied in Russian, she insisted on using the Romanian language because even she, at her age, wanted to practice, and she was complaining that there aren't enough people around to practice within the region. This was also unimaginable 15 years ago. With that said, the inertia is and will continue to be very long. In the July elections, turnout was only 36%, the lowest in the country. And of those who did bother to go to the polls, more than 80% voted for the electoral bloc of the communists and socialists, by far the highest score in percentages for the commies in any region of Moldova. This may sound discouraging, but in 2019, the same hard-left politicians got a bit over 83% at a much higher turnout. And in 2014, when the hard-left ran separately, the socialists got 57% and the communists got 40%. That will be 97% in total for the far left. And in 2013, the General Assembly, the local parliament basically, attempted to ban the use of the phrase "the history of Romanians" in schools. Today, even those who supported that attempt laugh and are a bit embarrassed by that moment. In fact, in 2014, even the president of the Turkish parliament at the time, Cemil Çiçek, in a rare moment, intervened in the controversy by reminding the heated political actors that Gagauziya is part of Moldova and that the Turkish Republic supports Moldova's bid to the European Union rather than separatism. A position which surprised many analysts and observers at the time, though if you know a bit of history of modern Turkey, Çiçek's position makes perfect sense. If the Turkish state were to officially endorse Gagauz separatism, then that would make the case for the Kurds back home more palatable, and that is something that nobody wants. So, as I was saying, the inertia is long. While war has been successfully avoided here when it was the most likely, the tensions will not be flattened anytime soon. The current governor, Irina Vlach, left the Communist Party because the Communist Party was not pro-Russian enough. Elections for the local parliament were due to take place in May 2021, but were postponed all the way till October because the communists' shenanigans at the national level who proclaimed a state of emergency, allegedly due to the pandemic, in reality an attempt to prevent snap elections. Nevertheless, until the Constitutional Court ruled against the measure, the elections had to be cancelled. The new legislature, following the October 3rd elections, resulted in 24 independents, 10 communists, and 1 MP from the political party We Are Building Europe at Home, a party name which doesn't exactly make sense in English, but in Romanian the acronym reads like peace. The party was remarked on the national stage through the way they launched their national campaign for the general election via a girl being resurrected from a coffin. No, I'm not joking. Take a look at this.
Moldova, țara mea de glorii, de-a pururi, toți m-au tot trădat. Ne-au vândut oamenii și vatra.
Well, the stunt didn't really work out nationally. They got 1.28%. But in the elections for the local legislature in Găgăuzia, they did get 1 seat in the 35-seat legislative. Now, while 24 of the members are technically independent, most of them are only nominally without party affiliation. Still, this is another small step. It is now kinda haram for more and more local politicians in Găgăuzia to associate with the communists. But all of these aspects, in addition to showing the slow inertia, are also the aspects that keep the area underdeveloped. I mean, if you want to see economical and technological backwardness, Comrat is your friend. Again, I've been in over 100 capital cities, including capital cities of unrecognized states or autonomous regions. There aren't many of them in 2022 or 2021 that still have TV repair shops as a viable business. And for cathodic ray tubes to boot. Not many places in the world where you can make money by repairing cassette players or radio sets. Those are still quite plentiful here. And this, make no mistake, is not about poverty. Harare, Zimbabwe, for instance, is on paper about 3 times poorer than Comrat. And I would argue that the paper is wrong, and Harare is even poorer than that. But in Harare, nobody repairs TV sets, and as downtrodden as Zimbabwe is, the people are a lot less isolated culturally and technologically and a lot more open to development. Now, of course, there are very sound reasons for which one could argue that this relative isolation and closedness practiced by Gagauziya comes with several advantages. However, judging by the private homes, the individual clearly has economic aspirations that are not congruent with the current attitude. Translation: if economic development is desired, some of this closedness would have to give way for more openness. Yes, it's a complicated process with a long inertia, but economic prosperity can't come and won't come without it. And at some point, enough of a critical mass will figure it out that the potential of this place is being consistently unfulfilled. But until that happens, Gagauziya remains a place frozen in time. Admittedly, frozen in time in a different way than Transnistria, but frozen in time nonetheless. I've been to many places that are similarly or even more conservative than Gagauziya, such as Dnipro in Ukraine, Yerevan, Belgrade, or Przemyśl in Poland, but somehow those places found a way to keep what was good for them while at the same time open up and replace what was keeping them back. Gagauziya will have to do the same. The choice is not on whether to open up or not, but on how to do it. And for the time being, the administration, the elite of this autonomous region, doesn't even understand that. The elite in Gagauziya is still in 1995 at best. And I say that the choice to stay this way isn't there anymore precisely because nobody is immortal. And the current elite, which is frozen in time, will eventually give way naturally to a new one. And those younger ones have a different vision. Now, hopefully, they'll be able to do this peacefully. And I say this because whilst every society has generation gaps and conflicts and tensions, the difference between those over 40 and those under 40 in how they view the future of Gagauziya is so striking that extra care will be necessary. And as I said, the current elite is simply inept on all of this. And the newly elected elite in Chisinau isn't much better either. Evrosayuz Global Homo is not a good answer to anyone here, nor is neo-Ottomanist claptrap promoted from Ankara via the Turkish consulate. So yeah, enjoy this place while it's still stable. The next decade is going to be a lot less stable and boring for Gagauziya. The political conflicts of 2013 and 14 will look like children's play in comparison to what may come. Unless depopulation continues, in which case the very idea of a Gagauz autonomous region will disappear slowly but surely. Admittedly, this avoids conflict, but it also ends Gagauz presence here, just like it happened in certain places in Russia or in Romania. At some point, not enough Gagauz people will be around to be worth preserving the identity. Stubbornness is good, but too much of it can kill in a civilizational way. Now, to be fully honest, that grim scenario is the least likely because Gagauziya, just like most of Moldova, has managed to survive worse things. And these rural-based cultures and peoples tend to be incredibly resilient over time if they deem acceptable to endure the trade-offs that come with a lack of urban presence. I guess we'll see what happens. And with that, I will end the episode here. Thank you for watching. Please let me know if you have visited Gagauziya and what are your impressions. Don't forget to subscribe, join our Telegram groups, visit our website, and I will see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative.